Hey everyone, this is Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to Untold Stories. This is a show where we dive deep into the lives and personal histories of some of crypto's most influential leaders and find out how the crypto movement truly came to be. Let's dive in. You've heard of Tezos. Everyone's heard of Tezos. Tezos has launched in 2018, but it was being worked on as early as 2014 by Arthur Breitman and his wife, Kathleen Breitman. Tezos is one of those projects that you know has thought of so many things when it comes to governance, socioeconomic experiments, and breaking down the protocol levels to different aspects. A lot of the contentious changes that Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the different toxicities that we went through, Tezos launched with all those things in mind. So when I talked to Arthur today, we really spent a lot of time like wargaming and talking about what if there's a civil war? How would Tezos solve that? All these different scenarios we talked about. We talked about the consensus algorithm that they invented. And I'm a huge consensus algorithm nerd. You know, I like talking about proof of work, proof of stake. But what was so cool that's proprietary to Tezos is the liquid proof of stake. And we talked about like what is liquid democracy? And what would it look like if something like Second Life were to actually be on Tezos? How would governance and democracy work? I have to be honest, I wasn't preparing for this episode to be as intriguing as it was. I thought we were just going to talk about protocols and blah, blah, blah. But if you notice, there was a lot of laughing going on. There was a lot of interest. My interest was piqued. His was too. And I really wish I continued to do this further. At the end of the episode, Arthur and I decided to meet in Miami in a few weeks. So I'm really hoping him and I can sit down and continue this conversation. I promise you at the end of this episode, you're going to be so piqued by Tezos. I don't own any, but after this episode, I may go buy some just because I'm interested now. And after talking to Arthur, I feel like it could be a good hedge for the future. If I don't have any, it may be worth it for me to even just get a few $100 worth. So you guys will really enjoy this episode, and I'll talk to you guys right after the ads. I'm so honored that Untold Stories is sponsored by eToro. eToro is the smartest crypto trading platform and one of the largest in the world with over $1 trillion in trading volume per year. What I really love about eToro is that the CEO has been around the Bitcoin space since 2012, so they really put their money where their mouths are. US customers, myself included, we can trade the most popular crypto assets, in fact, almost all of the ones that you want to trade, with low but transparent fees. So you actually know what you're paying for everything. And that's really important. So if you're not ready to trade yet, you can practice building your portfolio with the eToro $100,000 virtual trading feature. So you can create this whole portfolio without trading with any real money to see how you'll do. And you can learn all the different ins and outs without using any real money yet. And then once you're comfortable, you can enter the market and start buying and selling crypto for real. Best of all, one of my favorite features is that you can connect with 11 million other eToro traders in the world, myself included. And we can talk trading, charts, and all things crypto. So listen, head on over to eToro.com, links are in the show notes, and build your crypto portfolio the smart way. If you're buying, selling, or holding crypto, you are a low-hanging fruit for the IRS. And for many years, I've been waiting for a good solution where I can be proactive in my taxes, but more importantly, to sleep at night, better than be reactive. Before the IRS picks you for an examination, subscribe to our newest sponsor, Crypto Tax Audit. They're really cool. Crypto Tax Audit is an audit protection service designed for the needs of the crypto trader. That's you, me, and really everyone else. It acts like an insurance policy. How? Well, what happens is subscribers will get detailed instructions on how to prepare a great crypto tax return by yourself, including preparing the required anti-money laundering forms. Then, if the IRS examines your crypto reporting on your tax return, the experts at Crypto Tax Audit will provide all the IRS representation and tax law research at no charge. The statute of limitations on a crypto tax return is 6 years. Crypto Tax Audit covers you regardless of what year the IRS examines, all for a low price of $97. Best of all, you can sleep well knowing that the best crypto tax gurus are ready to defend you. Crypto Tax Audit is a service of the Donnelly Tax Law. All new subscribers of Crypto Tax Audit at $97 a year will get a copy of the latest ebook, Does My Crypto Tax Returns Need Surgery? It's a phenomenal book. You get it as soon as you sign up. It's a short but super, super powerful book. While other services are reactive, Crypto Tax Audit are proactive and give you the tools like their Crypto Tax Health Check so you can reduce your chances of getting an IRS letter in the first place. No one likes that certified letter from the IRS. Donnelly Tax Law specializes in complex crypto tax return preparation. No situation is too complex for them. So check them out at cryptotaxaudit.com. That's cryptotaxaudit.com. And listen, guys, start defending yourself today. Untold Stories wouldn't be here without the amazing production company Blockworks Group. A few months ago, I approached Blockworks Group and I said, hey guys, I want to do a show, Untold Stories. Can we make it happen? And these guys are the only event and podcast production company that I trust. Really, the show is powered by them, and it wouldn't be here today without the amazing work of the Blockworks Group team. So for access to all the premier digital asset conferences and to check out their other podcasts in their network that they produce, check them out at blockworksgroup.io. That's blockworksgroup.io. I promise you will not be disappointed. You've probably heard about Tezos, but if you're like me, it may be something that is confusing to you because Tezos is, the ideas behind it are so new and exciting and different than what we're used to understanding before. I'm happy to have Arthur on the show today. Arthur, thank you so much for coming on the show.
And thanks for having me.
One of the words that gets thrown around a lot with Tezos is that it's trying to create a true digital commonwealth. And it's an interesting word. I don't usually see that word when it comes to, Bitcoin, crypto, blockchain technology. What is a commonwealth in this, aspect, in this stance for Tezos?
Yeah, a commonwealth is also it's a synonym for a republic. So I think what's interesting in calling it a commonwealth is that it indicates that we can think of these communities and these blockchains as polities. In a sense, there are, in some sense, political organizations, and that kind of highlights that aspect. And one of the important aspects in Tezos, of course, is participation. The idea is that it's not just a passive system; it's a system where people are active. They're incentivized to be active, in fact, and they can shape how the system evolves. And a lot of the ideas in Tezos are based on ideas about how constitutions work, for example.
Yeah, but what I don't understand, not that I don't understand, what I'm trying to expand on is, when it comes to a commonwealth, it's not just, I guess I look at it more like Virginia, right? So in the case of like a state, you choose to live in that state and the commonwealth governs every aspect of your life. Traditionally with crypto, we're talking about finance, right? But now, between your consensus algorithms, the liquid proof of stake, and your architecture that you guys have done, it's expanded on that, and it's not just about finance; it's also about governance. And you've really pushed forward with the concept of we need governance, and crypto needs governance.
Yeah, and so what's funny is that the white paper and the position paper of Tezos, I don't think they actually use the word governance, but I will not diss on the word for either. It's not a bad word. I think the idea is that it's true that I think blockchains are mostly useful to represent money, but if I were to extend that a little bit, there's money, there's contracts, and the proper generalization, I think, is anything that requires coordination of actors, incentivized coordinations of actors in different places around the world, or people who don't necessarily trust each other, and that's that I think is a very interesting and general use case. There's a there's a concept in game theory. So there's a well-known concept of the Nash equilibrium, and the Nash equilibrium is basically the strategy you follow when you're reflecting on everyone else's strategy, and you pick your strategy accordingly. So that's a Nash equilibrium. And there's also the Pareto equilibrium, and the Pareto equilibrium says that it's not an equilibrium that's a problem. It's this Pareto optimality is when you're in a situation where you cannot make anyone better off without making someone worse off. And in general, you want to be Pareto optimal, because if you're not Pareto optimal, it means that you could make some people better off without making anyone worse off. So, and the problem with the problem with life in general is that a Nash equilibrium in general is not Pareto optimal.
But is it possible?
Yes, and so that's what's interesting. You have this concept of super Nash equilibrium. So super Nash equilibrium is one that's obtained when people are free to create any type of contract and automatically enforce any type of contract between them. And if you allow that, if you allow people to basically form contracts, form agreements, and automatically enforce those agreements, you get a stronger thing, which is a super Nash equilibrium. And those are Pareto optimal. So basically what this tells us is you have really good outcomes where everyone, where you can't make like people better off is the ability to contract at low cost and to have automatic enforcement of those contracts. And I think that's what smart contracts and blockchains can bring to the table.
This is not just theory to you. You are, the developers are, as far as I understand, the developers have put into the code and in practice when you guys launched in 2018, a lot of different concepts to make it as fair as possible. And I guess I'm still unconvinced that you can have like a perfect system where everyone is fair and everyone is equal. I feel like in some situations, if someone's going to have more opportunity than someone else, or the distribution wise, then I'm not sure if there is a solution to that, but that can be, put out. I guess what I'm leading towards is where, if we look at like, I know you don't like to use the word governance, but if you look at the word governance on a spectrum and you look at Bitcoin as the complete, one side, Arthur, if you look at Bitcoin and it's like complete non-governance, right? And then you look at, its lack of governance is governance, basically. And you look at something like almost, completely on the other side of that. And I would almost put Tezos in that category, because I want to read a quote from your co-founder and your wife. She said, "The great irony of Bitcoin is that ultimately it's a tool for community consensus, but it's marred by a tremendous amount of animosity. Tezos allows for innovation to happen in a systemized way, as opposed to one born of politics." Do you think that it's too much? Do you think that too much governance can be worse than not enough governance?
I don't think you can quantify governance of like, you have it, you don't have it. I think everyone has some form of governance, and Bitcoin has governance, and you've seen Bitcoin governance at play. You've had soft forks, for example, or the decision not to do something is also governance. I think the right framing for it is more what are the processes that you have in terms of governance, and who basically can do what on the system. And I think I think what you can look at is how difficult is it to enact any change. And I think it's certainly valuable in Bitcoin that it is very difficult for people to unilaterally enact changes. You don't really want that. You don't want anyone to be able to come in and just change the system any way they want, because then you don't have any stability, and you can't have any pretense at creating money if you don't have any at the very least stability in what you're doing. So that's one aspect. But I don't think that in that respect, Tezos is the opposite. I don't think so. I don't think it's easy to modify Tezos. So in a current version of the protocol, you basically need something like an 80 or 70% quorum and an 80% supermajority if you want to do anything, if you want to approve something. And so it's set to only allow for extremely non-controversial changes.
70% is a huge. It's like a supermajority, and we'll get into
80% supermajority. 80%.
80%, and
70 is just a quorum.
Oh, okay. So I want to ask you, because and a little bit later on, I wanted to talk about baking and delegating.
Yeah.
But just because you brought it up now, kind of my response to that is, do you remember when EOS first launched? There was a lot of issues because simply people just weren't voting. So simple things couldn't get passed through. Could you run into could Tezos run into a similar situation like that?
Not really, for two reasons. One is that voting is delegated by default. So you can vote by yourself, but by default, your vote is delegated. And so it's delegated to the bakers, the people who produce block on the system. And because of that, those people typically pay attention because they're running a server. And so they kind of pay closer attention on a more regular basis as a chain. And so they're more likely to participate in a vote. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if people don't vote, the quorum adjusts down until people are able to vote. So over time, the system unlocks itself. It can take a while, but in the same way that you can have difficulty adjustment in Bitcoin, you have a quorum adjustment.
So basically, when someone creates an account, their vote is automatically delegated to, what is it, the 32?
No, it's not automatic. They have to do it, but most people have done it. So far, 75%. 75% of the funds on the platform are delegated to some baker.
What type of votes have you guys had in the past?
There's been 3 votes so far. The first one was for a version of the protocol called Athens, and that was really about testing the voting mechanism. But there were a few changes in the protocol, so it was changing some constant, allowing for a little more time for executing transactions in the blocks. And the other one was for reducing a little bit the granularity at which stake is computed. So just 2 simple constants, mostly like testing the whole voting mechanism. The second proposal has been that passed was Babylon. And Babylon was a much more substantial change. It changed the way that accounts are organized. It changed some of the opcodes.
So it was not a controversial change. How many votes were? Like, what percent of votes were made?
It was over. I think the quorum was between 70 and 80%, and
wow.
and the proportion of yes was over 80%.
So I mean, Arthur, it's cool because you've had 3 votes. The project
the third vote is Carthage. It is in the process of happening.
Okay, so you've had 2 votes in the process of the third. The project is only officially launched less than 2 years ago, and it's intriguing because if someone said, can you explain your thoughts on Tezos in 1 sentence, my response would be, I would say that it's well thought out. This is very well thought out. I like to think that I know a little bit about blockchains, but I have to say, prior to this call, I was surprised about how little I knew. And when I had to dive into the research and understanding the architecture and how your network shell works, and you have separate types of accounts, implicit and originated accounts, and we'll get into that in a little bit. In a little bit, but I guess my question is what was the vision? And because I know that you guys were working on this as early as 2014, so that's a long time to be working on something, right? Without launching. What was the vision, and whose vision was it? What was the idea 10, 20 years down the road? What made you guys fall in love with this concept?
I mean, for me, what really attracted me to this idea is, first of all, I've always had a fascination for self-amending systems. There's 2 that I can cite. One is a game, Nomic. So Nomic is this game where you start with a very minimal set of rules, but those rules provide for their own amendments, so you can create more rules from those rules. And the game starts out with a very simple win condition, and then that gets transformed over time. Now, since it's a game and the point is having fun, people create crazy rules, and there can be a perception sometimes that if you have a nomic-like system, that's what ends up happening. I don't think that's the case. I just think that's because it's a game, and that's what the original rules points toward. The other self-amending system that I'm fascinated about is this concept in AI called the good old machine that was introduced by a scientist called Jürgen Schmidhuber. And what the good old machine does is that it tries to solve a problem, but as it tries to solve a problem, it also tries to come up with a way of rewriting itself, plus a proof that the rewrite is beneficial. And so you have a machine that's like perpetually trying to come up with provable way of improving itself. And I don't think it's a practical concept, but it's like well defined mathematically. And that's and I find that idea fascinating. So we have a self-amending system with Tezos. It's a blockchain that provides for its own change. What really made me think about that is in the early days of Bitcoin, there was a lot of excitement over some innovation that was happening in this space. Innovations around. There was some innovation that people were thinking about proof of stake, and they were really interesting ideas that people were researching. There were ideas around privacy, around smart contracts, and I was very excited. I was super excited about Bitcoin, and I was at the time, I was very upset that a lot of the so-called altcoins. So first of all, most of the altcoins didn't have any type of innovation, but I was thinking, but some of them did. And I was seeing the Ethereum project go its way. I was seeing Zcash go its way, and the rationale at the time was that, well, innovation can happen in altcoin, but it doesn't matter because Bitcoin can always incorporate that. What Bitcoin is a ledger, right? Bitcoin is just a ledger. The underlying algorithms that maintain that ledger that can change, that can evolve over time. And we went from that vision to a vision of saying, Bitcoin should never change, and all these ideas are bad anyway, and so we shouldn't even have them.
You really think that happened?
Yeah. There was a time. There was a time where a lot of ideas were seriously being discussed, and it's a double. It's a thing. It's kind of like sour grapes. In the fable of the sour grapes, there's a fox who wants to eat grapes, and the grapes are too high, and so he can't reach the grapes, and he decides that they're sour anyway. And so this idea is like, well, Bitcoin shouldn't change, and those ideas are bad anyway. I think it would be more plausible if people were saying like, you know what, some of these ideas are good, and we wish we had them, but it's not worth changing Bitcoin for them. I could respect that position. Or the idea of saying like some ideas are good, and then we're gonna but we need to very, very carefully integrate them over time. That's respectable. But the idea is like, no, these ideas are not good, and we wouldn't integrate them anyway. It's kind of like, wow, what a nice coincidence that all the ideas are perfect from the get go. So I'm pretty skeptical of that point of view. But I also come from I also come from a position of maximalism in the sense that I think this is largely a winner take all scenario for blockchains.
You really?
Yeah. I think the main use case by far is being some form of money, and that monetary premium is a huge network effect. And so, like, that's the whole point. You don't want, you can't have your feature being introduced by everyone launching a new chain. Like right now, we have a bunch of chains coming on, which are defined solely by a consensus algorithm. As a consensus algorithm does not make money, and you need, you can't just every time someone has a new ID just launch a new coin. It's not going to work. So either these coins are not going to succeed, they won't get any network effect. And then you won't have innovation, or they will succeed, and you'll have something that's even worse. You'll have disruption, and so that's and I see that as problematic. You need to have a way to account for innovation. So there's two things. First, you need to agree to the ideas that innovation in this space is possible. That you can come up with a better mousetrap. That's the first thing, and the second thing is you need to have a way to fold in that innovation while staying decentralized, and that's what Tezos is trying to do.
The way Bitcoin was built originally was that it's one block of code, it's one protocol, it's all the same. So any real changes, even like something like SegWit that shouldn't have been controversial, was because, like you said, it was a change to the main protocol. However, with Tezos, with the architecture, you've broken that down into three. You have the network protocol, transaction protocol, and consensus. Can you explain the difference between the three? And because they are now broken up into three separate ones, do you feel that it's easier to make changes to one specific one instead of making changes to all of them at the same time?
Yeah, so the main abstraction that you have in Tezos is one between the shell and the protocol. And you can think of the shell as it's a process that runs and it connects on a peer-to-peer network and it exchanges messages with other peers and it grabs blocks, and blocks have operations in them, and it's and it does reorganization, writes data to the disk. It does all of these functions, but it's completely agnostic. The shell is completely agnostic. There's just an underlying blockchain underneath. And for the shell, what a blockchain is just a series of blocks, and those blocks have operations. It could be transaction, it could be anything else. It doesn't know. So it it organizes blockchain, and then it has a small module. I mean, it's not that small, but it has a module, which is a protocol. And what the protocol does is it defines what the rules are. And so the protocol is completely sandboxed. The protocol doesn't have access to your the protocol doesn't have access to your disk. It doesn't have access to the file system. It doesn't have access to the network. The protocol purely defines the rules, and that's abstracted. And the protocol itself, you can divide it into the consensus part. So the consensus part is basically the heaviest chain rule. It's telling you which chain, given two chains, which one should be the canonical one. And the other one is all the rules about the transactions. What is a transaction? What is a contract? What happens when a certain operation takes place? And yeah, I think those changes make it more modular and easier to change. It also means that part of the idea was was to minimize any need for governance. You really want to have your governance over the smallest possible surface. And that happens to be anything that's consensus critical code. So anything that defines the role of a letter, anything else. So there's one shell, which is in Camel, but there's another one that's still in development, but you can still already use it to synchronize the chain. That's in Rust. So you can write shells in different languages, but the consensus critical code, the part of the code that defines the system, that's just an abstraction, and that's what you modify, and that's what people agree on when they are when governance takes place.
Okay, so then if we move forward, there are two types of accounts. There are implicit accounts and originated accounts. As far as I understand, an implicit account is just like Bitcoin, Ethereum, pretty much any other crypto, public-private key pair. Even with some other fancy different blockchains, you can use that account to vote, to delegate. But you've launched also this other type of account called an originated account. So why the two? What's the difference, and why the two?
Yeah, so the difference is that the originated account is more of a smart contract. So it has code, it has data, and there's been a cleanup. So part of the changes that came in Babylon was cleaning up a lot of the system. At launch, we had three types of accounts, and so there was and you could pay transaction fees using any account, and so on and so forth. So that the demarcation was made much clearer in the latest version of the protocol, where you have a complete separation between the two. And so you can think of anything that's implicit as what you would use for money, for payments, anything like that. And anything with smart contracts would be an originated account. But I don't think that's not particularly unique. I think Ethereum has this distinction as well. For example, what I think is fairly new that I haven't seen other smart contract platforms do is that making sure that the fees are paid only by implicit accounts. means that you can reason more efficiently about the validity of a block. What it lets you do is that it lets the people who create block not execute a smart contract. So you can execute a smart contract only when you seize a block and not when you create a block. It's a small technical thing, but just doing that, you can gain a 2x or 3x in throughput by making sure of that. That's one of the nice thing with Bitcoin. If I see a Bitcoin block, it's very, very easy. It's very fast to check if the block is valid. The first thing you're going to check is, are there any UTXOs which are being spent, which are actually not UTXOs? That's a very fast check, and then you verify the validity of the transactions themselves. So it's very direct. You don't need to execute a lot of code. With smart contracts, it's a little more different because you need to compute, you need to execute smart contracts, you need to compute gas, and so on and so forth. So what this does is that it allows us to basically create blocks without having to worry about gas. You basically, all you worry about is a block creator going to get the transaction fee or not? That's the only thing you care about, and then you defer the execution for when people actually get the block.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, that's part of it.
It's so stupid. I just said that, right? No, I guess if I were to compare this, would this be a fair comparison? Because a lot of times our listeners, like, sometimes these things get a little too complicated. So if I were to create an analogy and say, like, what you just described, an example of that were to be was, let's just say with Ethereum, they decided to split and create, well, they already did that, but create within the Ethereum blockchain, like, two separate types of accounts. One for like microtransactions, where it's a certain amount of value, it's microtransactions, and therefore no gas is needed. And then you have a different type of account where gas is needed, but the account can do a lot more. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair comparison? Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah. And I mean, I think
the thing is, it sounds so brilliant. That's the thing. So why isn't anyone else doing that? Like, that sounds like such a great way to solve the gas issue and the transaction fee issue, right? I
mean, you're still going to hit some limits, and the thing is, like, there's only, your validators can only validate so many transactions, but there are a lot. So if I had to tell my philosophy in terms of like roadmaps or anything like that, is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruits, and I think a lot of people are interested in breaking new ground and making very advanced stuff, and people are not that interested in picking the low-hanging fruits. And so I'm here for I like to grab those. So, for example, one thing that's fairly easy to do is, in general, it's very hard to parallelize smart contract execution because smart contracts can interact with one another. But the general case is that they don't. If you look at a typical block and you have a bunch of transfers, almost none of these transfers interact with each other. And so being able to explicitly say that in a block so that a validator can validate in parallel, for example, I mean, that's something that's helpful. And it's not trivial to implement, but it's not also like breaking new fields of computer science or anything like that. And I think there should be more of a focus on those low-hanging fruits and less so on grand like 5-year roadmaps, because we don't know where we don't know what the world will look like in 5 years. And I'm not saying that it's not a good idea to also do like breaking new ground with important research. I'm not saying that at all. I think that's very valuable, but it's also important to prioritize.
Are you worried about that dreadful certified letter from the IRS? Are you worried about the IRS auditing your crypto returns? Then you need Crypto Tax Audit. They provide IRS audit defense designed for the crypto owner. Subscribers will get detailed instructions on how to prepare a great crypto tax return by yourself, including preparing the required anti-laundering forms. Subscribe today at CryptoTaxAudit.com for $97. That's CryptoTaxAudit.com. I'm so honored that Untold Stories is sponsored by eToro. eToro is the smartest crypto trading platform and one of the largest in the world, with over $1 trillion in trading volume per year. What I really love about eToro is that the CEO has been around the Bitcoin space since 2012, so they really, really put their money where their mouths are. US customers, myself included, we can trade the most popular crypto assets, in fact, almost all of the ones that you want to trade, with low but transparent fees. So you actually know what you're paying for everything. And that's really, really, really important. So if you're not ready to trade yet, you can practice building your portfolio with the eToro $100,000 virtual trading feature. So you can create this whole portfolio without trading with any real money to see how you'll do. And you can learn all the different ins and outs without using any real money yet. And then once you're comfortable, you can enter the market and start buying and selling crypto for real. Best of all, one of my favorite features is that you can connect with 11 million other eToro traders in the world, myself included, and we can talk trading, charts, and all things crypto. So listen, head on over to eToro.com, links are in the show notes, and build your crypto portfolio the smart way. I agree with you. It's extremely important to prioritize low-hanging fruit versus 5-year plans. I think both are very important, right? I think both are very important. But what you're alluding to, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that more focus needs to be put on the now, because crypto moves so quickly. Like, we don't know where we're going to be in a year. It's constantly like you have to be updating, changing, and growing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, because really 5-year plans, Arthur, don't work in our industry. It doesn't. Kind of, now that I'm thinking about it, I have to say I agree with you. Now that I'm really kind of saying it out loud. But Arthur, I'm going to push back, because you do think down the road. You do think 5 years out. I mean, look at the questions that I've simply asked you already, right? Like the question, for example, how do you prevent people from not voting, like what happened on EOS? You had a great answer to that. It's already been well thought out, and in practice, it was already solved. So you must have had to have thought these through for like down the road. So,
I didn't think it would be 5 years out.
Yeah.
That's why I think it was. I think
you see why that's exciting, right?
But the issue existed at that time. I think one of the main problem is that if you have some things that, if you have a lot of users and your users have very specific needs and they're pushing back on those needs, then it's kind of easy to iterate on a product and make it better for your users, because you get this constant feedback and you can climb that gradient and you can say like, okay, my users want this, my users want that. And it's, you can't just do that. I think you also need a little bit of a vision. There's a famous quote by Henry Ford, I think, saying like, if I listen to what my customers wanted, they would just, what they wanted was a faster horse. So
I like that. That's a great quote.
Oh yeah, I don't. I have to look
No,
it up.
I know,
to
but
do the exact quote, but it's something like that.
Sometimes the customers don't know what they want.
And then you have figures like Steve Jobs, putting out products and saying like, no, this is what you want, and telling people, and that's all fair and good. But there's that's all fair and good. But you still need to have some feedback. And right now, the main problem is that the main use case so far has been basically store of value. That's been demonstrated by Bitcoin. People just buy Bitcoin and hold it. And I think I think it's a completely fair use case. I think that holding is using. I'm completely in line with that assessment. However, it doesn't provide for a lot of useful feedback, and that's an issue. And it's only once once you start having more people using it, it's a bit of a catch-22, because you don't have enough people using it, and so as a result, you don't get a lot of feedback. And as a result, maybe you're missing out on people using it. So there's a bit of a conundrum here.
I see your point.
But it's the main, it's in its entire space. That is the main problem. The main problem is that there's more infrastructure, there's more tooling, there's more technologies, and there is demand for technology. That's the main issue.
I feel like that happened over the last 2 years. So, it's like the way I almost look at it is, you go from one extreme to the other. So do you ever see those like TRX workout, like the ropes that people are able to like work out in their house, and it's like you pull on. I never.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, I've never used one either, but I've seen it.
I didn't say I didn't use them.
No,
I've seen them.
No, I'm saying I didn't use I know. I'm just teasing you.
Okay.
So you know how like when you pull, like the harder you pull one way, the harder it'll pull back the other way. I almost feel like that's her space, and that may be a terrible analogy, but it's the only one I could think of at the moment. But you're right. So in the beginning, and you know this because you were largely into space back then. Our infrastructure was lacking. I mean, look at the company that I started in 2011. It was an infrastructure company, but like the fact that we didn't have any. Okay, but so there was ton of demand. Infrastructure wasn't there yet. Look at the bubble when we went to $36. Look at the bubble when we went to $20,000. Look at the bubble went to $1,200. Right? Whenever we have the stress test, when there's a huge amount of demand, we learn that our infrastructure is not there yet. So now, Arthur, our demand is like maybe like a 20th of what it was, just based on, it's hard to quantify that. But the infrastructure growth continued to grow, expand. So now we're at a point now where I think you're right. I think the infrastructure that we have now is saturated, but the demand is not growing fast enough, but it is still continuing to grow. But I just think infrastructure grew too fast. So is that a problem, or won't it just kind of balance itself out?
Well, one of the biggest questions that I have, and I unfortunately don't have an answer to that question, is there's one thesis, which is that people are interested in using these things for a lot more than store of value. And the reason they're not using this thing is that the infrastructure can't scale. And if they were to use it, fees would become so high that it would become impractical. And, it's like no one is using this because if everyone was using it, it wouldn't work. And so they don't even try. But it feels a little bit like, Yogi Berra saying, no one goes there, it's too crowded. Or no one takes the highway, there's like too much traffic jams. And it's certainly appealing because I do remember an era where people were really trying to use Bitcoin. People were really trying to pay their bills with Bitcoin. There was a lot of focus on payments, being able to bootstrap as money. And according to some people, it's like, well, fees kill that. And that's the reason why it doesn't happen anymore. And I'm not the other side of the coin is that, there's no benefit to doing that. You can pay your coffee cup with dollars. There's never going to be a strong benefit for doing it with Bitcoin. And therefore, since there's no benefit for doing it, it was just a fad because of novelty, but there's no real demand here. And it's not worth really addressing. And I can see both sides of the argument.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see both sides of the arguments too. But I'm going to do a really bad segue here, but I want to talk about like my favorite subject. I nerd out and geek out on consensus algos. Like I should probably get a t-shirt that says I love consensus algos. It's nerdy, but they're cool, right? They're cool because they're novel and they're different. So before I had heard about Tezos, one of my favorite consensus algos was delegated proof of stake. I was very involved in the early BitShares and Steem community, and I saw how that worked, but then I saw how it wasn't going to work. And what was so interesting? The Steemit and BitShares community accurately predicted the flaws that EOS was going to have, because really, and I can say this because I know Dan Larimer very well, and I was very involved.
I mean, he's some guy who created the whole tree. So,
but it's the same shit. It's the same thing. It's just I can say that, yes, there are differences, and maybe they're expanded on, but realistically, BitShares, Steem, and EOS are all based on the same DPoS, and they're all based on like the same concepts and ideas. And I hate to say it, but the same code. I'm not here to like hound on that because I love like Steemit and the BitShares community. They're phenomenal people. Why do I bring this up? Because you've expanded on that with these really cool concepts of liquid democracy and liquid proof of stake. super cool when I was doing the research. But you're here now, so maybe you can explain it better than I can to our listeners. How is liquid proof of stake different than delegated proof of stake? And how is that different from proof of work and proof of stake? I know it's a huge question. And then we could talk about liquid democracy, which was super freaking cool. But tell us about liquid proof of stake and what that's all about.
Yeah, so one of the design goals for the consensus in Tezos was that anyone could basically, if you had 0.01% of the of all the tokens, or maybe 0.1% of the tokens, you could create 0.1% of the block, and you could create 0.1% of the inflation. Because if you do that, it basically means that you don't really have any inflation. And right now, if you're using proof of work, the inflation pays for electricity, so it's paid by everyone. You get diluted by the coins which are being created for miners, at least until the block reward runs out. But then it's not clear that you have a secure enough of a security budget from fees alone. So that's the first thing. But if it's just saying, like, fees in a proof of stake system can be deflationary. That's a nice thing. And so you have this design constraint. You want, if I have a small amount, but you also don't want everyone staking everything at the same time. I didn't like systems where you would have to say, like, no, I'm staking, and then once I start locking my funds, I can receive rights to create blocks. The idea was that the right to create a block would just happen randomly. If you own a token, maybe you randomly get the right to create a block once in a while, and then you would have to put up a safety deposit before creating that block. So it's not staking in a sense of like, oh, I'm locking some funds and then I receive rights to create blocks, and only the people who lock their funds get right to create blocks. Everyone receives the right to create blocks. Everyone does. But in order to exercise them, you need to put up a safety deposit. So that's the first thinking. The second thinking is that an important criticism of proof of stake that was made at the time is that it required your keys to be online at all time. You couldn't really use cold storage if you were doing proof of stake, because your keys would have to be ready to create blocks. So there was this idea of having a different key for signing the blocks. You would have your key, and then in the event that you receive a block, you have this different key that lets you sign the block. So that's a design consideration. Now, of course, it lends itself immediately to a form of delegation where the delegated key could be controlled by someone else. You could have your own key, and then you could have someone else create the block, and that ends up with a lot of private agreements between people who run servers and create blocks, and people who delegate their rights to create blocks to those people. So that's the model. It's not based on the idea that there's going to be a fixed set of delegators and people vote for the delegators. That would be DPoS. It's the idea of, look, you can create your blocks if you want to. You have control. You have this right to create blocks. They're yours, but you have control into like how you allocate them. And so what you see is you see bakers basically buy these rights to create blocks from people.
Would it be a fair comparison to say that it's the proof of stake version of a built-in protocol level pool?
Yeah. I think that would be fair. There was the difficulty. The problem is that some people might think that it's delegation weakens staking because there's less skin in the game. The people might not pay attention who they delegate to, whereas if it's their own operation, they're paying more attention, and that's fair. The problem is that delegation is a reality, and if you don't provide for it in the protocol, people will find it using custodial solutions. So basically, if I have some tokens and I can't delegate them within protocol, what people will do is they will send their tokens to an exchange who will do it for them. And I think if some people do that, I think that's fine. But you don't want it to be a mass. You don't want it to be completely massive. You want to encourage self custody, and so there's a balance between not discouraging self custody, but also encouraging direct participation. And it's hard to find the right balance. It's kind of like seatbelts, if you have
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
and
Before you even said it.
Yeah. It's like and there's a famous article in by an economist about seatbelts. And before I proceed, I will say that it's really important to wear seatbelts, and everyone should wear seatbelts. But the question is that if you have seatbelt laws, then people are less likely to die in accidents, but they're also more likely to be less careful overall, and so they're likely to be more accidents, and so the effect goes away. You could end up with like less fatalities or more fatalities depending on which effect is more important, and you have exactly these dynamics play out. You can make your protocol tougher, but then people will like flock to trusted third parties, which is bad, or you can make it more lenient, but then they may pay less attention, and it's really hard.
It has to be
a
perfect balance.
It's really tough.
It has to be a perfect balance. So what type of scenario did you envision when it was decided, well, not decided on, but when it was coded in that, you can have, let's just say me, for example, and I can delegate you, but then you can delegate someone else, and then we all share the rewards, but I'm kind of at the top. Is that accurate? What type of scenarios did you envision that would be needed for a delegate to delegate their voting of someone else? So I guess like another layer.
No, there's only one level of delegation. There's no.
Oh, I'm wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
So what?
No, I'm not a fan of too many layers, because if you have too many layers, then things starts getting.
So what's transitivity then? Where does transitivity come in?
There's no transitivity.
Was there at some point in the past?
No. The only people who had something like that were. Definity had proposed something like that, where basically you would like delegate to someone, and they would delegate to someone, and they would set programmatic rules for how to make a decision based on how like different people that they follow make a decision. I think this.
Well, I'm not going to call out my friend's company, but I just paid for some research about Tezos, like $100, and I better get my money back because it's wrong.
Oh my God! Well, yeah, there's no transitivity.
No, it's wrong. It's great.
I think the problem is that if you have if you have too much meta delegation, if you have too many layers, I think you breed systemic risk.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's what I was a little confused, because that's why I asked you, Arthur, like, in what scenario would this be needed? Like, I didn't ask you about it and explain it. I was like, why, in a nicer way, what would be the purpose of this? But now you've cleared that up. Thank you. So the question I have for you is, what's your community like? Like, where do they congregate? What do they talk about, and how are they different from other communities?
Well, where does it congregate? First of all, the most active forum is probably Reddit. So Reddit.r/Tezos. They are also different chat rooms. There's a big one on a Riot. So Riot is actually the name of the client. The name of the protocol is Matrix. But so Matrix/Riot is there are some Tezos rooms. There's some groups on Telegram. So the usual platforms. And I think there's different members of the community. I think there's a lot of people who are excited about development. So there are like a lot of developer groups working on Tezos, building libraries, utilities. There are groups which are more focused on baking. So there's a baking Slack, for example, where the bakers congregate and talk about running nodes, running delegation services. So that's another aspect of the technology. There are people who are just fan of the projects, who want to, who are excited about Tezos, want to know where Tezos is going. So you have all these different groups which are slightly different, slightly different interests, but they're all generally pretty interested in discussing about Tezos, hearing what's going on, sharing ideas. There's also a new group. There's a new forum called Tezos Agora, which is focused on more research and technical discussion about the projects, and it's fairly new, but it's been growing. It's been growing well.
What's your future? I mean, you guys are out there. The bread is rising, right? To use the baking term, you're growing the community.
Yeah,
the technology works. It's broken down into multiple layers. You've already had 2 votes, and you're working on the 3rd now. Largely, the consensus algo is working. Socioeconomic experiment is working. What now at this point, if the demand was there, what would be your optimal, like what type of projects or companies or contracts, what would you like see built on Tezos? And we have thousands of developers that are listening to this show. So this question is for them.
Yeah, so I think the initial use cases I'm most excited about, I will go into, there's a few categories. One is finance. In general, lowering the ticket price for financial services is useful. Peer-to-peer insurance, for example, is one area that I think is very promising.
That's my favorite. I think the whole insurance industry should be on the blockchain.
Prediction markets, I think, are very very cool. You know, I used to a long time ago. I used to be on Intrade. I love looking at prediction market for politics. You know, they give you a better sense than polls.
How accurate are they? Because I always see people post in, but then after the fact, I never see how accurate the results are.
Well,
are they good?
That's a good question. Is like, how do you judge the accuracy of something like that? Because you know they can't be perfect. And the one way you can judge the accuracy is to say, like, well, if they say that something is going to happen and they give it a probability of 60%, does it happen 60% of the time? And that tends to be true. And the reason why, the main reason why we can expect them to be good is that if people knew them to be bad in some predictable way, they would arbitrage them. They would make money on the prediction market. That's the thing, is that it's a whole efficient market hypothesis, which says, like, if you're so clever, why aren't you so rich? And it's the same thing. If you think prediction markets, for example, are bad, then arbitrage them. There used to be there used to be this perception that that populist options were underpriced by prediction markets, and it happened because it happened because of two events. It happened around the same time. It happened because of Brexit, and it happened because of Trump. So Brexit and Trump were both seen as they were not the favorites in prediction market. Prediction market was thinking that Hillary was more likely to win. I think Trump, like around towards the end, Trump was at 25%, Hillary 75%. And they also saw that Brexit was not going to pass, and they were wrong on both accounts. And around that time, 2016, there was a narrative that emerged saying, like, oh, prediction markets don't know anything. They don't understand. They're focused on the elite mainstream. They don't understand the importance and rise of populism. I'm like, okay, maybe that's true. But then you had a French election. And in the French election, shortly after, you had a fairly establishment candidate versus a populist candidate. And I saw a lot of people were betting on the populist candidates because they were saying the same thing. It's like, oh, yeah. What they didn't see is that, where the polls for Brexit and for Trump, they were pretty close. They were like 49-51, this type of thing. So there was a big margin of error. And there was none, the establishment candidate in France was polling like 20 points ahead of the populist candidates. So like it was a no-brainer in terms of a market bet.
I was going to say that French people may be a little bit smarter than us and realize that sometimes populist candidates say dumb shit, but that's besides the point.
I mean, I'm not even making a point about populism or anything like that. I mean, I'm just look at the numbers. If you poll 20 points, maybe the polls are going to underestimate the populist candidate by a couple points. They're not going to be wrong by 20. Like the polls are not going to be wrong by 20%. So that's the lesson here. And I find this stuff fascinating. I like prediction markets for politics.
Yeah, prediction markets for politics are cool. I'm going to start paying more attention to them. And I think
there's a good website.
You get a better...
electionbettingodds.com?
Electionbettingodds.com. I never heard of it, but I'm going to check it out.
All right. Yeah.
They're not one of my sponsors, but now they should be.
Okay, so it's a website maintained by Max Singlot and John Stossel. And it basically what it does is that it looks at like bookies in the UK and it aggregates that and it shows you probabilities. So it shows you like the estimated probability of who's going to win the Democratic nomination, who's going to win the Republican nomination. Well, that's probably Trump. Like who's going to win the election. It also has odds for Brexit. So it's really cool to look at. So those are like financial applications I think are interesting. I think there are also interesting use cases for games. And gaming in particular, I think is has a lot of interesting use cases. And a lot of people I think, get the wrong idea. They think that you'll take regular games that exist and then just like, oh, we'll take regular games and we'll put the game items on the blockchain. And I think if you do that, it's not necessarily enough. I think it's a different type of game that we want to see. But we've seen we've seen thriving games with online economies like Second Life, like World of Warcraft. And I think
I've been playing Second Life for years when I was a kid, not anymore, but yeah.
And I think those type of application, those type of virtual worlds, like having the properties on them be more real by being on a blockchain, by being extensible. To me, that's a real and that's a massive use case.
How cool would that be if you get something like Second Life on Tezos? Because you have all the governance baked in already. You know, like how I use the word bake, by the way, my pen right there.
Nice.
I went to college for that shit right there. So you have it all baked in. That would be great. And like thinking of crazy scenarios. I mean, I like to war game in my head. I like to, because I'm a loser. I like to like think of different, like crazy extreme scenarios, and then how, technology can solve those scenarios. So imagine like, I don't know, man, this is so cool. I know we're going over, like kind of digressing a little bit, but it's really cool to like think about. Imagine a situation, Arthur, where you had a Second Life, right? And you had a million people playing the game. And imagine if it was on Tezos, and imagine if you literally had this whole, like imagine if you had like in there, someone should totally do this. It would be so cool. Imagine if you had in there like, a legislature and a Senate or a parliament, and it all worked based on the protocols, and it all worked based on the blockchain to be able to vote and to vote on different things. And imagine if there was like a civil war almost, like, and things had to be voted on the blockchain, but within the game itself. Imagine like people actually having to go to a voting booth in the game, and the booth pulls up like, hey, what would you like to do today? Do you want to vote? These are the things you need to vote on. Do you want to delegate? Mm-hmm. It would be a phenomenal experiment. It would be so cool. I actually know Phil Rosedale, who's the creator of Second Life. Now he has High Fidelity. He's a really good friend of mine. And we actually spoke about putting Second Life or High Fidelity on EOS. The project fell apart because the bear market came. But I should reinvestigate this idea again. This would be so cool.
Yeah. Bear markets are tough, but like, where else can you buy a bear?
Oh, that's great. Can I tweet that?
I think it's been done before, but you can.
That's great. Arthur Breitman, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was really wonderful. I know that we educated a lot of people on some really cool topics today. Definitely piqued everyone's interest. Now, a listener listens to this show. They're curious about you. They're curious about Tezos. Where would be the first place that you would want them to go to learn more?
Oh my God, I'm stumped. Maybe Tezos.com. I haven't looked at Tezos.com in a while, so I don't know. I don't know how it is right now.
Yeah, you're right.
Really, I like the chat rooms on Riot the most. So that's where I would go. But if you go on Reddit, you can see you have all the links for joining the different community chat rooms.
Amazing. All right, cool. Thank you again for coming on the show, and we'll talk to you soon. I'll hopefully see you in Miami in a few weeks.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. New episodes of Untold Stories are released every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. EST on untoldstories.com, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Untold Stories is produced by Jason Yanowitz, Michael Ippolito, Reed Hannaford, and Riley Silbert of Blockworks Group. Our account executives are Gina DeFelice and Julie Muroff. Our content is written by Kathy Zolo, Ronnie Tishner, and Scott Offer. Special thanks to Wayne Dallaire from Jump Dog Audio Productions. And of course, I'm your host, Charlie Shrem. You can follow me on Twitter at Charlie Shrem to continue the conversation. Send me some messages, feedback, or anything you want to say. And remember, please give some love to my sponsors, and I'll see you next week. Remember, strength in numbers, and information is power.